Hey everyone, so with the release of Reign of the Supermen on Blu-ray, I thought I would do a piece based on that story arc. So a lot of the character designs that I've done are taking more influence from the 90s original story arc. But I did add in some features that are more similar to the cartoon that was just released. I did this in Procreate. So what I did first of all was I took a graphite sketch that I had done. That always helps just have a basic layout and know what I'm going to do. I think I have a bad habit, and I think maybe some other artists do too, of just kind of starting and hoping for the best. And the more I've gone on, the more I realize that that's not the way to do things. You really save yourself a lot of hassle later on if you kind of sketch things out and at least have an idea of what you're doing before you just jump into the deep end. Especially with 4 characters here, it really helped have a basic layout of what I was doing. Starting with Cyborg Superman and then moving on to Superboy, then Steel, and then the Eradicator. I'll mostly go in that order throughout this demonstration here. It will change up every once in a while when I just forget to do something, but in Procreate, the tool that I'm using most of the time during the line art here is from the inking section. It's a tool called the Studio Pen, and this is the tool that I use through not only most of the line work, but also with the shading, which you're seeing here. One of the things that I have noticed in Procreate is that the pen dynamic, unless it's really, really large, I have a hard time having those dynamics show up. And it might just be because my settings are wrong and that I have a heavy hand, but the shading that I have gone with here, it's a shading that I use commonly anyways, but it is a little bit more flat than maybe I might use with like microns or something in more traditional media. There isn't any kind of cross-hatching or anything like that I feel like I can confidently achieve here in Procreate. So it kind of has taken on a little bit more of a cartoony look, and you'll see that more in the coloring as well. But that is part of the reason of the style choice of the shading and later on the coloring as well. But like I said, it's a kind of style that I do occasionally anyways, especially with more comic related things. And it works pretty well, I think, for the metal, the sheen, and the high contrast that you'll see in both Cyborg Superman's metals and Steel here with his hammer and just his whole attire here. With the Eradicator here, I know I'm going to have some lighting coming from his hands eventually. But for whatever reason, I just put in the shading on the hands currently, and I know I'll get to it later with some of the coloring and probably some of the effects later that I'll also be using. With 4 characters, it can get kind of tricky to not have it look too congested, especially in a piece like this where basically everybody's clashing together. I want it to be dynamic, I don't want it to be static. That is something that I have been struggling with, honestly, throughout most of my time as an illustrator, is to try to make it look like the most dynamic and narrative piece possible. Nothing's worse than just having something look super boring. But at the same time, it is tricky to not have everything look like a mess and super confusing. One of the things that has helped with this piece, and really just in general, is you might be able to notice that some of the reds are just slightly different. Same with the blues. I don't want anything to look too much the same. And that really goes for some of the more orangey, slightly orangey reds in Superboy, and a little lighter blue. compared to the Cyborg Superman. Also with Steel, mostly in the 90s, he's kind of depicted with a little bit more of this blue tint to his metals. So the Cyborg Superman, I definitely went with more of a gray kind of look. Steel has that blue tint. And coming up here, you'll start to see some of the highlights forming in the metals. Really, metal is just really fun to do. Sometimes it's hard not to get a little carried away, and trying to make sure that it's as most effective as possible when you're doing the metal. You'll see some of the parts I've erased and kind of gone back. And with the Eradicator here, you'll also notice that I put in this really baby blue at first. I end up not liking it so much. So I go in, I make it darker a couple of times actually, just enough so it looks different than both Superboy and Cyborg Superman. And also, I didn't really explain why I had kind of that rosy color in the background starting off. Just to switch back on and off, you can see it coming up here now. I knew I was going to have kind of a reddish background, and I wanted to make sure that throughout the illustration that the colors were more or less kind of working with that color range. Also with Steel's swing there, it's just a white that I have turned the opacity down. And after adding in most of the highlights here, one of the things I want to focus on then is some of the lighting effects. And one of the ways I have achieved that in Procreate is through a tool called the Elements. And I'll be using that for the clouds in the background, also the light pen for the lightning, and a flare for the Eradicator, and some of the other highlights. I also use it for the eyes and sparks coming off of Cyborg Superman's head. And for some finishing touches, I add in some more shadows, and with that, it's done. If you guys do have any comments or suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, you can reach me on my Instagram at Goudelock, and also on Gmail at Goudelock@gmail.com. Thanks guys, thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon. Bye.